Hot watercress pastry is probably one of the most difficult pastries to work with because it is such a short, crumbly texture. And we don't roll it out, we shape the pastry around a jam jar. And in order to stop the pastry sticking to the jam jar, we need first of all to cover it with cling film. I've got one piece here, and I'm going to slide it over the top of the jar, turn it around, and then cross the cling film over the bottom. So we've got 2 layers on the bottom. Turn the jar the right way up and then just tuck the remainder just inside the jar. We're not going to bake it with the pastry, but we do need to be able to get hold of it. Now for the pastry itself, in my sieve I've got 200 grams of strong plain flour. We need strong plain flour because of the high gluten content. We want the structure of the pie to be able to support itself while it's baking. And I'm just going to give it a little bit of salt in there. That will help to develop the gluten and also give the pastry a little bit of flavour. And I'm going to knock it through the sieve so that we're erasing the flour, making sure that the salt is evenly distributed and getting rid of any tiny lumps. So we're separating all the flour grains. In my saucepan over here, I have got 25 millilitres of milk, 25 millilitres of cold water, and 75 grams of white cooking fat. White cooking fat is made from vegetable oils, so it's perfectly all right for vegetarian use. Now what we need to do is to melt this together and then bring it to the boil. So you can break the fat down with a wooden spoon. It won't smell too nice, won't look too good, but because it's a white fat, it will give you a lovely short texture to your pastry. Okay, the fat has very nearly melted and it's beginning to come to the boil. And once it has boiled, then we can pour it straight into the flour and begin to bind it together with a palette knife. You can hear the sizzle, so it's definitely boiling. So we turn the heat off, straight into the flour, and then bind it together with a palette knife. It is quite a dry pastry, so it will give you a fairly stiff dough. You can see that it's quite crumbly there. And what we'll need to do is to get your hand in there to actually bring it together into a dough. It's not going to go any further with the palette knife. So squeeze it together with your hand, wiping the dough around the bowl to make sure you get all those ingredients out. We don't want to waste any of it. Okay, and there's our dough ready. Now we need to take away about 1/4 of it, because that's going to form the lid to our pie. So I'll just pop that to one side. And then in my hands, I'm just going to mould this a little bit until it forms a relatively smooth dough. And this is the sort of texture that you want. And with the jar upside down, we're now going to begin to mould it around the jam jar. This is going to give our pie its shape. Now it won't have a perfect shape, won't look perfect as it would do in the ones that you buy in the supermarket because they're handmade and they're very rustic. Now don't get your pastry too thin, otherwise it's not going to support the contents. So I've moved about halfway down the jar with the dough, and now I'm going to turn it over and pop it onto a greased baking tray. Now in order to keep that pastry where it is, I now need to wrap it up in greaseproof paper. That's a little bit wide. I've got a double layer of greaseproof paper, and I'm just going to hold it in place with a couple of paper clips, and this is going to stop the pastry collapsing when we fill with our lovely pork and onion mixture. And now we've got to get the jam jar out of the middle. And with a table knife, what you need to do is to work the knife between the jar and the cling film all the way around, just to loosen it a little bit, and eventually the jar will come out. You might have to go around it a few times. Is it coming? Yeah, it's coming. And there we are, we've brought the cling film out. So now we've got a lovely deep pocket to pop our filling in, and the greaseproof paper is holding everything in place. Now my filling is minced pork, and I've mixed it with some very, very finely chopped onion, a little bit of sage, and a shake of salt and pepper. And you need to pack this in fairly tightly, but not so that it's overflowing. So there's our filling inside our pie, and then we need to pop the lid on it. Now for the lid, we're going to work that quarter of dough that was left over into as smooth a ball as we possibly can. So it's roughly the same size as the top of the pie. And here I've got some beaten egg, and I'm going to use that egg to help me to seal the top of the pie. So egg side down, and then carefully seal that lid in place. And now this is going to bake at gas mark 6, electric 200 degrees centigrade in a conventional oven, or 180 degrees in a fan oven for 30 minutes. Okay, the pork pie's been in the oven now for about 30 minutes, and that should have been long enough to have set the gluten structure of the cake, so that once I take this greaseproof paper away, the pastry will actually support the sides of the cake. So fingers crossed, and hope that it doesn't all collapse. And if you just give it a quick test, the pastry is firm, but it's still very soft, and it looks really pale and insipid at the moment. So what I'm going to do is to give it a really liberal glaze with the beaten egg that I used to seal the top off, top and sides, and then we're going to pop it back into the oven for a further 15 to 20 minutes, just to finish off setting the pastry, making sure it's completely dry, glazing to give us a lovely rich shine, and also making absolutely sure that that meat mixture is thoroughly cooked right the way through to the middle. Okay, don't forget that this is hot, so you will need oven gloves. So another 15 to 20 minutes in the oven. The pork pie is cooked for a further 20 minutes, and you can see the effect of that egg glaze. We've got a nice rich golden shiny glaze over the top, and I've had it sitting on a cooling tray just so that it can start to cool from all sides, including underneath. And we need to have a look what it looks like on the inside, so very carefully I'm going to lift it up, and with my cook's knife I just cut straight through the middle. Lovely short texture, and there There's our beautifully cooked pork pie. Meat cooked right the way through to the centre with just a few of the meat juices running out as we cut it open.